The night the river ate the light, I thought I'd be the only one awake. I learned, standing at the lip of the cremation gat with my shoes half in the cold mud, that only is a lie people tell themselves to feel less watched. By 2 in the morning, the gats are a neighborhood of small flames and louder silences. And whatever you imagine a place where bodies go to become something else will either be disproved or become truer than you want. I was there because of a story, not the journalistic kind with neat sources and quotes, but the kind that leisurely eats at you and refuses to let go. How a city treats its ends tells you everything about how it treats its beginnings. I'd taken trains, buses, a rickshaw that argued with the route, to get to the Gee Hat on the river's bend, an old place with stone steps that have been polished to satin by the souls of generations. The caretaker, a thin man named Heron, had agreed to let me stay the night and watch. He said the phrase folks use when they want to be both hospitable and not sentimental. It will be quiet. You'll see everything that needs to be seen. What I hadn't expected was the way the place takes your breath before it offers you a story. It does not shout. It arranges itself like a careful narrative. A child's rag beside a bundle, the soft clink of a bell somewhere across the water, a mosquito net left like a ghost of sleep. The first pyres were already down near the water, small and efficient, family members moving like choreography, hands exactly where they needed to be, eyes fixed on the work of releasing. The smoke was not the cinematic black you expect. It was thinner, the color of old paper. It smelled like lemon oil and char, like kitchens and last words. Heron found me a place near the northernmost stairs. He is the sort of man whose face seems designed to have been frightened before. Decades of watching The Edge of Sorrow have given his eyes an economy of surprise. He handed me a cup of tea and a shawl that smelled faintly of sandalwood. "You sleep here?" he asked. "No, I'm staying," I said. "Just the night. Watch and write." He nodded as if the arrangement were as ordinary as dawn. "Good," he said. "Night tells the truth if you listen." He sparked a cigarette, and the glow on his lips looked like a small moon. "But do not ask too much of the river." I thought that coy. 2 minutes later, when the chorus of frogs started and the river took on the bulk of a thing in the distance, I understood what he meant. People come to the Gay at all hours. Grief doesn't wear a watch, so the night is a low festival of arrivals and departures. A taxi would pull up, a family would stumble out, eyes raw, shoes in hands. They moved without gesture toward a small, authoritative routine. The wash basin, the dhoti, the last touch on foreheads. Heron and a few others, young boys who shuttle wood, a woman who had been sweeping for decades like a person purifying herself by habit, performed the practical parts, the tasks that, in other places, would be hidden from polite sight. They did it with hands that knew exactly how to make something go gentle. Midnight deepened into something that felt like concentration. The flames became the point of a compass, not merely destruction, but measurement. I kept my notebook in my lap like a shield. Words are tricky near a gat. They can feel like trespass if they rush. I wrote sensory things. The taste of ash in the air after a gust. The way a child's laugh would come from nowhere, and the mother's hand would find the laugh like a key. The pattern of lanterns along the walkway, each one a small, stubborn sun. Around 2 a.m., a family arrived with a quietness that made the air lean toward them. It was an elder, thin and copper-skinned, being supported by a son who seemed to be the same age as the elder's shoulders. The son's wife walked behind, carrying a box of incense. They did not sob. They moved as if they were fulfilling a long-remembered obligation, which is often the way people love at the end. A deliberate, unfinished grace. They prepared quickly. A small pyre was built, and a cloth was folded around the elder's features. I kept my distance. There's a privacy code at places like this that isn't polite so much as necessary. People at the edge of letting go have an instinctive right to their minutes. The pyre burned with the small attentive heat of a ritual that had been practiced for generations, each hand steady, each movement a memorized prayer. The son spoke something under his breath, syllables like a river itself. The wife later pressed a coin to the elder's palm. While the flames did their work, the river answered with its own slow motion. Boats in the distance, a ferry's light blinking, gulls arguing over a floating scrap. It's easy to reduce a cremation site to the grotesque, because death is one of our last taboos. But what reached me that night, more than terror, was a kind of reverence, a human machinery of care working in dignified tandem to move a life from one state to the next. Then, the other presence arrived. It was subtle at first, a shadow whose edges did not conform the way shadows do. It moved with independence from any lantern. At first, I thought it was the result of tired eyes, too many hours staring into flame, clumsy pupils misreading smoke. But shadows, like memories, have peculiar loyalties. This one did not belong to anyone nearby. It waited on the outer steps, as if deciding whether to climb. I felt it before I saw it, the way a cold part of your body remembers being cold. The hairs on my forearms prickled. Heron noticed as well. He stood, his cigarette burning out. "Stay seated," he told me. The words simple but heavy. The figure ascended, joining a procession of people who came to the river and did not speak. It stood at the rail, hands on the stone, looking out rather than in. It was a woman, though I could not tell if she was old or young. Some things look like they carry all ages at once. She wore a shawl that might once have been bright. It clung to her with a dampness that could have been river mist or something else. She watched the water like a person searching for a door. Instead of going to a fire, she walked between the pyres with the slow attention of a mourner who does not belong. No one stopped her. That, I later learned, is because the Giat is a permissive place. It allows a kind of homelessness to breathe, a place where loose people who hover between the living and what we call after can find a bench, a blanket, a silent company. She did not approach any of the families. Instead, she visited the small, unattended offerings, an orange, a scrap of paper with a name, a little bundle of clothes left next to an unlit pyre, and she touched them as if proof that these were still on the earth. A child's rag there, forgotten, a single comb, a bent spoon with years of food stains in its curve. She would pause, rest her palm on each object, and then move on. I wanted to follow her, to ask who she was, but the Jat has its own rules about questions. You can ask, but you must be prepared for answers that dissolve into weather. Heron watched her like a man watching a river move. He did not speak. At some hour, my watch blinked 3:46 a.m. The woman stopped before an empty stretch of steps. She looked down at a place where soot had not yet settled, where no family had been. She crouched, unpacked a small bundle from the inside of her shawl, and placed a tiny fire there, 2 pieces of wood and a pinch of something almost invisible. She did not perform a ritual with family. Instead, she fed the flame like a person feeding a lamp in secret. Her hands were quick and precise as a surgeon's, but the act was private, as if the flame belonged to a separate liturgy. The fire flared for a breath and then steadied, no larger than a candle. She sat beside it, knees drawn to her chest, and began to speak softly. I could not understand the language at first, but gradually the cadence came into focus, an old tongue woven with meaning. She whispered names, one name repeated in different forms like an incantation. At once I felt ridiculous for wanting to hear more. Eavesdropping at a place of endings is a kind of sacrilege. Still, her voice had the pull of an undertow. I shifted in my seat, and she looked up. Her eyes met mine, and the world narrowed. She had the look of someone who has watched humans pretend to leave things behind and knows the secret of what they cannot. For a second, neither of us moved. Then, without a preface, she waved me closer. Heron threw his hands up the fraction of an inch. Objection, but not a hard one. The woman patted the stone beside the tiny flame in a universal invitation. I approached like someone walking onto unspoken property. "You watch?" she asked in halting English. "Yes," I said. "Do you know names?" she asked next. I know a few," I replied. Her eyes narrowed as if appraising a small animal. She reached into the bundle and pulled out a photograph. It was old, the edges softened from handling. A boy in a school uniform stared out at me with gravity too big for his years. The woman's fingers moved over the picture with tenderness that made my chest ache. "He wanted to cross," she said. And that phrase was not about travel, but about authorization, about what it takes to let something go. "Did he not?" I asked, though I suspected the answer. "No," she said simply. "No one came." She wrapped her shawl closer. "So, I come." She told me, in broken sentences and gestures, about the boy who had drowned years ago on an evening when a festival made the river full of lights. Families crowded the banks, fireworks carved the air. A child slipped, and the world was suddenly less bright. There had been a frantic pull, a shouted name, a slip in the soap-slick steps. He was pulled from the water hours later and given to the Gahat without ceremony, a child whose family had no money to conduct a proper cremation. The women who worked the Gahat had performed what they could, washing, folding, a small pyre, but it had been insufficient to the world's ledger. "I brought him a lamp," she said. "Each year I bring toys. Each year the river forgets and then remembers. The city moves on. I am slow." She was not a ghost in the scary sense. She was a kind of guardian that did not belong to an institution. She had become an arranger of small things, an annual priestess for what the city mislaid. Her presence was more wound than threat, and because she worked with the minutiae of remembrance, there was something extra terrifying about the regularity of her grief. It was not a burst of violence. It was that slow, relentless return that wears out the edges of the living. For hours she recited names, some in a tongue that sounded like river rocks rubbing, some in English. And with each name the little flame rose, or the wind shaped it differently as if answering with its own breath. Around us, pyres died down and new ones were lit, the night maintaining its regular business of departure. But the woman only spoke the names of those who had no one else to call them. The river, in its infinite softness, seemed to lean in to listen. At dawn, the light came pale and patient. The woman stood and folded the ashes she had gathered into a small cloth, then tucked the photograph and a toy boat into the bundle and tied it like a small, heavy offering. Before she went, she took my hand, cold but kind, and said, "You write. Tell them. Not the big story with statistics. The small ones, the names, the toys, the lamp for the child." I asked her name, but she only smiled and said, "I am what I am called when remembered. There are answers like prayers in the world. You can't unpack them without tearing a delicate thing. When I left the Ghat, the city was waking into a gray that made every roof look like a pressed shirt. People returned with tea cartons and antiseptic seriousness. I carried the photograph like contraband. The story I had come for was less about ritual and more about obligation, about how societies choose what or whom to honor and whom to let sink. Weeks later, when I published the piece, careful, respectful, naming the woman only as the keeper of small fires. It was shared and liked, and then out of the news cycle. Headlines prefer tragedy with tidy solutions, funding, policy, programs. This was not tidy. The woman's work did not fit into budgets. People forwarded it to friends who nodded, then returned to their lives. But a small thing happened because of this story. Someone who read it learned the boy's name, Raju, and sent a toy boat to the Ghat with a note. A local school organized a cleanup and left lanterns lit for a week. An anonymous donor gave a little money for the woman to buy wood, and Heron made sure she received it discreetly. None of this solved the immensity of forgetting, but it was a small acknowledgement, a candle in a city with many shadows. The last line I wrote about that night, years later, is the one that keeps coming back to me. The place where we lay our dead is also the place where we return the favors the living forgot to pay. If there is terror in a Ghat, it is not the dramatic gust that takes a scarf into the river. It is the slow, quiet realization that the world is full of small debts, names unspoken, toys unreturned, promises made on behalf of someone else. There is a beauty in the woman's work. It is the kind of beauty that is not decorative, but necessary. The way someone's routine care knits the fabric of a city. She burned lamps for the forgotten boy, and in doing so, taught me that remembrance is the simplest, most radical act. To remember is to refuse the convenience of forgetting. To remember is to make a small flame that turns the night less anonymously vast. On nights when rain makes the river look like a sheet of wet iron, I think of the tiny fire on the steps and the woman's shawl. The memory sits in my chest like a smooth stone. It is both terrifying and lovely that somebody could be so relentless in their grief, and it is a kind of moral instruction. If you ever pass a place where people come to release what cannot be kept, pause. Someone might be tending a flame for a name you have never heard. Light a match. Lay a toy boat in the water. Learn one name. Remember it. It may be the smallest thing you ever do, and the most important.